Your podcast is a powerful tool that serves your audience and your business. But how do you manage it all, bring in new listeners, and convert those listeners into customers? That's what this show is all about. Welcome to Podcasting for Educators. I'm Sarah Whitaker, classroom teacher turned podcast manager, and I'm here to help you get the most out of your show, all while making an impact on other educators. Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Podcasting for Educators. Today, I'm doing something that I have not done before, and that is sharing part of a live training that I did inside of my online course, the Podcasting for Educators Prep School. It was a training that I did on what to know about your episode titles, and I'm excited to share it with you because I think it really has a lot of valuable information. I think that episode titles are something that a lot of you sometimes struggle with, or you are constantly second guessing yourself about how to title your episodes. And I'm also talking a lot about how to incorporate and how to have SEO top of your mind when you're titling your episodes. So we are going to play the bulk of that episode for you right now, and I hope that you enjoy. All right, podcasters, you know how many details come with producing just a single episode, and using the right tools is the key to creating high quality episodes in the most efficient way possible. One of my absolute favorite tools I use is Zencastr. I have tried so many different platforms for recording my guest interviews, and Zencastr is the one I've stuck with for so many reasons. It always gives me the highest quality audio because there is nothing worse than recording an episode that you can't use because of bad quality. It's so easy for you and your guests, even the not so tech savvy ones. All they have to do is click a link and we start recording. Boom, done. Plus, the video is crystal clear so you can repurpose your solo and your guest episodes on social media and on YouTube. Oh, and it gives you a transcript of your episodes. You can go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code EDUCATORS. You'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all of my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. So go to zencastr.com/pricing. That's zencastr.com/pricing and use my code EDUCATORS for 30% off. That's educators, all lowercase letters. The link will also be in the show notes. Okay, here we go. So I sat down to do this training and I thought it was, just going to be like a few slides, but then I realized there was a lot to talk about. So I am excited to jump in. So we're going to talk all about what to know about your episode titles. I think a big question that people have is, how important are titles for your episodes? And the answer is they're pretty important. So I definitely want you, if you aren't already, to make sure that you're giving your episode titles some thought. And so we're going to talk about why they're so important and what you can do. And then to make this easier for you, because it can be kind of stressful to come up with titles sometimes, can definitely feel like a lot of pressure. So at the end, I have like a free download thing for you guys that you can use to hopefully make this process a lot easier for you. So let's talk about why titles are so important. Number one is that they really are kind of the first thing that people see when they click on your podcast. They see that you have a new episode live, and it's really what determines whether or not they're going to push play on that specific episode. It's really the first indicator to them. Okay, is this a topic I'm going to be interested in? Is this something that is worth my time? Especially if it's somebody who has lots and lots of podcasts in their podcast library, like me, and I'm sure like lots of you as well. So that's number one. Number two, and you may have heard me talk about this before, but it is one of the very few things that are searchable within the listening apps. And when I say listening apps, I mean Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any of those places that people listen to your podcast on besides your website. So episode title and your show title are both things that are searchable. So I know some people don't search on the apps. I am somebody who I'll go into Apple Podcasts and I will search for a certain topic. And so you want to be keeping that in mind because there's other people out there who do the same thing. And you want your episodes and your podcast to be something that pops up when they do that. And then number three, titles are important because it plays into your long-term SEO strategy. So on number 2, I was talking about the listening apps, but here I'm more talking about like your show notes on your website. When you have the title for your episode, that's really where you're going to pull that keyword from to use in your show notes. So if you're not doing that yet, if you're not doing any kind of like keyword research or trying to stick with a main keyword or key phrase in your show notes, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And obviously, something like SEO, when we're talking about Google and those big search engines, that's really a long-term strategy. You can definitely see a lot of return on that quickly, but it also builds up over time. And if you're not familiar with SEO, which I think probably all of you are, but it stands for search engine optimization. So basically, when we're creating our titles for our episodes, we want to be thinking about what somebody might be searching for, whether it's in the listening apps or on Google. So let's look at some things to consider when you are titling your episodes. We want to have titles that spark curiosity and that sound engaging to the person who might click and listen. We want it to clearly describe the episode. I'm sure that you have experienced this. I know I have, when there's an episode of a podcast that you're listening to and it sounds really great and the topic sounds really great, but then you push play and it actually doesn't really deliver on what the title made it seem like it was going to deliver on. So you want it to be engaging, but you also want it to be true to what you're actually going to cover in that episode. You want to front load the important information in your title. And I think that this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make, because it might not be something that you're thinking about. And I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean by this in just a few minutes. But basically, if you have a keyword or you have a topic that the episode is centered around, you want that to be towards the beginning of your title versus the very end. And then, of course, we want to include an SEO keyword. And again, if you're not really considering SEO at this stage that you're at, it's okay. It's something that I would love for all of us to eventually work our way up to. I know that there's a lot of details that go into your podcast, and SEO might kind of be an afterthought, but I want you to kind of work backwards and start with SEO and build your episode from there. So obviously, it can be really hard to incorporate all of these things into a single title, right? Having a keyword, making it SEO friendly, making it engaging, making somebody want to click on it, all in the same title. And truthfully, there's going to be times when you can't accomplish all of those things. There's been many times when I've kind of thrown SEO out the window, and I've chosen to go with something that I think is going to be a lot more engaging based on that specific episode. And that's fine. You don't have to necessarily incorporate all of these things for every single episode title, because that would probably drive you crazy. But I just want you to have these things in mind for most of your episodes. So I just want to give you some examples of those things that I mentioned to consider when you are titling your episodes. So here are kind of some overall things that I've seen work really well for clients that I've worked with and for my own podcast. These are the types of titles that I see get higher downloads because they are engaging for people, especially for podcasts like a lot of us create, which is educational content. So these things work really well for educational content. So asking a question, an example of that is this title here, podcast or blogging, which is better? Questions tend to be very engaging for people. It makes them want to listen and hear what you have to say. It's definitely one that is always a suggested way to go. How to, actually putting the words how to in your title. This is just kind of to show you how different it makes the title. So maybe you're doing an episode about back to school night and you titled it the best back to school night ever. Instead, you could title it how to plan for the best back to school night ever. Adding those words how to just makes it a lot more clear about what the listener is going to gain from that episode. And I can say, and maybe you guys have seen this as well, that episodes that have that phrase how to in them, they do really, really well. They always seem to be very popular. And it makes it pretty easy usually to pick a keyword for how-to content. Framing your episode around any kind of mistakes. I just did an episode last week, I think it was, about like 5 mistakes that you might be making that will stop you from getting podcast growth. That's not exactly what it was titled, but it was something like that. And it's been a popular episode, even though it's only been out for 1 week. Another example would be the biggest mistakes I've made as a special education teacher. That is just another phrase. Using that word mistakes tends to be a way to get people to be engaged in the episode. And then any kind of lists. So using numbers, and this might sound familiar if you were a blogger before this. A lot of these things that I'm going over are going to be very similar to titles that maybe you've titled your blog posts. And same thing with your podcast. A lot of this just translates over really well. But using any kind of numbers, any kind of lists, 3 ways to get the most out of your planning time. Showing any kind of transformation. So again, an example is how this veteran teacher learned to love her job again. So you're making it really clear that in this episode, you are going to show how somebody started at point A and they got to point B. Kind of along the same lines, an episode that shows results. And if you work with any kind of data, doing an episode around like solid data that you've gotten on a student would be a great way to show results and to share that experience. This was a real episode of mine, and it's one of my most popular episodes. The one thing that's doubled my podcast downloads last month because it's showing a result. It's making people go, oh, well, obviously I want to double my podcast downloads too. So I want to see how she got that result. Okay. Another phrase that tends to do really well is any kind of roadmap or guide or framework. An example of that would be my 5-step guide to becoming a homeschool mom. This is also a really good way to create any kind of, like if you have yet to create a lead magnet, these kinds of episodes translate really nicely into a complimentary lead magnet that you could promote in that episode. And then a last example is a title that speaks to a need. It makes people want to have the things that you're talking about. So an example, why you need these 5 STEM resources. These kinds of episode titles and these kinds of episodes lend themselves really well to being great for promoting any kind of resources that you have or any kind of affiliate links. It can be hard sometimes to promote these things and figure out how to do it in a good way. These kinds of episodes where you're listing out top resources do really well. Again, I think it was last month, I did like my 7 top podcast tools. Again, that wasn't the exact title, but something like that. And it did really well because people love to be given a list like that that speaks to a need that they have. Okay, so I want to go over, I mentioned before that one of the things to consider when you are titling your episodes is to try and front load the important information as much as possible. So if you are doing a guest episode, I always recommend, unless it is a celebrity, like it's Barack Obama or whoever, or a well-known person inside your niche that your audience would recognize the name of, then put their name at the end of the title. So that's what I mean by front loading that important information. Put the topic of the episode and then something like with your guest name or featuring, versus having the guest name first. Like, I don't know, if I was on a podcast and the title was Sarah Whitaker on how to be a good podcast guest, or Sarah Whitaker teaches how to X, Y, and Z. So instead of having the guest name at the front, put it at the back, unless it is somebody who's well known to your audience. Another thing while we're talking about guests, sometimes it can be tricky. Sometimes you have those guest episodes where you cover a lot of topics and it can be hard to pick a title because you covered so many things that you can't just like zone in on one thing. So my go-to in these situations is usually to just list off a couple of the main topics and then say something like "and more" with the guest name. All right. So keeping on along the topic of front loading information. I mentioned that this is a big mistake that I see people do. And I've been paying attention lately because I've had some clients do this. And then I look at their data and we notice that their episodes don't do as well when they do this. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So sometimes maybe you haven't done it before, but sometimes maybe you have a series of episodes, like you're going to say, okay, in October, I'm going to stick with the topic of, or actually, let's just use the example I have. Maybe in August, you're going to do a back to school series and you want to call it your back to school series. But what people tend to do is put back to school series, and then they put the title of that exact episode. And then their next episode would be back to school series, and then the title of that episode. So it follows a pattern for several of the same episodes. What I've noticed when people do that is their downloads like decrease. So like episode 1, maybe it does really well, but the further that you get along in the series, it's almost like people get bored of seeing that phrase at the beginning of the title. So instead, like, I don't think it's a bad thing to put the name of a title, but put it on the end of your title. So instead, here I would say 5 ways to eliminate distractions during room setup, back to school series. So they know that it's part of that series. Back when I first started my podcast, I did a launch series. I think it was like 4 or 5 episodes. And I put the name of the exact episode. And then I can't think of the word for it, one of those lines, the straight lines to break that up. And then I said launch series for all of those episodes. So put that on the back end of your titles. Hopefully that makes sense. It keeps the series fresh. And I think that you'll do better by sticking to that. Okay. So we went over the guest name. The other thing is to put that, if you have a keyword in mind, which I highly recommend that you do for all of your episodes, try and put that at the front of your title, because when you go to do show notes, that's going to be something that is going to be good for SEO, is to have that keyword towards the front of your SEO title. So like here, if my key phrase or my keyword was going to be new school counselor advice, or even if it was just school counselor advice, I'm going to have that on the front of my title and then the episode. And this is, I'm calling it a hack, but like sometimes it can be tricky to have your keyword at the front. Sometimes it just doesn't, it's hard to like get that right and make it like sound good and make sense. So if you're ever in that situation, if you have a keyword and like you can only think of something with the keyword at the end of your title or at the middle, do this. Put your keyword here, and then the rest of the title. So that's like my go-to. All right, let's talk. This is a big thing I want you to walk away with today. And that is that I want you to keep SEO top of mind. This is something that I am working on doing. It's one of my goals for the upcoming year, is to almost do kind of like a backwards design. I think sometimes, and maybe you can relate to this, we think of our topic, we outline our episode, we record our episode, we produce it, we do our show notes. And it's not until our show notes that we think about a keyword. We go to write our show notes, and that's when we pick our keyword. Instead, I want you to try to do your keyword research first. So if you do your keyword research first, you pick a keyword to stick with, you outline your episode around this keyword, then you already have that in mind when you sit down to write your show notes. And everything is just going to be, it's going to flow easier. I'm sure that sometimes if you've ever done a blog post or show notes, and you pick your keyword and you're like trying to get that keyword in your show notes and it just doesn't sound natural, that's not good for SEO. So if you can have that keyword in mind first, then that's going to be in your mind as you're outlining and as you're actually recording your episode. And it's going to come out easier, and it's just going to flow nicer when you actually go and write your show notes. And it's going to force you to actually have SEO in mind when you go to do this. So if you are not too familiar with keyword research, or if you need some more ideas, I know I have stuff in the course on this, but I am always trying to learn more about SEO. I am trying to like just get us in the habit of doing it from the beginning so that it can just come naturally and be a part of our process. I also like, sometimes I'll just go into Google and, I'm sure you guys know this, that people also ask, like start typing. That can also give you, like, if you search a topic and you go down to that people also ask, that can also just give you like more ideas and more things to cover in that specific episode and things to put in your show notes. Because if you're actually putting those questions that are showing up in Google in your show notes, that's going to do really well for SEO. I do use Ubersuggest usually. So I'll have like a topic in mind and I'll head there, and I'll show you an example of that in just a second, and like how I then take that and create a title from it. And then of course, like also Pinterest, Instagram, those all are places that you can go for like a quick just search where you start typing in your topic and it'll finish it off for you. So you can get some ideas on there as well. But keywords everywhere, that's another popular one. Just pick one and try it out. Right. I still use the free version of Ubersuggest. I think it gives you good information. It limits you to I think it's 3 searches a day. So if you were doing like a big bulk planning session, then it might be worth either using this in conjunction with something else or getting the paid version. Okay. So here's an example of how I would take a topic, put it into Ubersuggest, and then kind of like brainstorm some titles from it. So show notes is always a popular topic. It's always something I could talk a lot about. So I put show notes into Ubersuggest, and instead of going for the one that, has the highest search volume, I'm choosing to use podcast show notes template. So it'll pop up with a bunch of different keyword ideas. There were even more at the bottom. It'll tell you the volume, the difficulty, all of that. So all of these are going to be good keywords because clearly people are searching for them, but I don't want to go with the one that has the highest competition. So I am choosing for this example, podcast show notes template. So from that, I could kind of take if I started with this keyword, I could then take my episode in a couple different directions by choosing a title and going from there. So I could do a show notes template for you, 5 things to include in your show notes template, save time with a show notes template, create a show notes template in 10 minutes or less. So there's so many ways that you can start with a keyword, plug it into a title, and then form your episode around that. So kind of going backwards from what a lot of people do when they plan and produce their episodes. Again, this is Ubersuggest. If you guys haven't tried it, I would recommend just giving it a go, going in there and kind of looking around and trying it out, see how you like it. I highly recommend, if you are not already, to make sure that you are checking your data monthly. I always like to look at the end of the month and just jot down like your top 5 episodes at the end of every month. And that might often be the same 5 episodes, but over time, the more episodes that you accumulate, you might see some new episodes kind of taking the ranks. And don't just pay attention. Don't just say like, okay, well, this episode, is the highest downloaded, but actually jot down those titles and see if you begin to find any patterns, because that might give you an indication of what kind of title patterns, what kind of words maybe you're using are resonating most with your audience. So what I would love for, if you want an action step today and you want to kind of try and improve your process with your episode titles, is to we're approaching the end of September. So at the end of September, look inside your host at which topics have done well so far. End of the month is also a great time to poll your audience. So maybe you could look at those top episodes and you could do a poll on your Instagram and see what people want to hear the most. So maybe I go in and my top episodes are on the topics of show notes, private podcasts, and putting your podcast on YouTube. I could take those 3 and I could take it to a poll and see what people have to say. Then you could sit down and kind of do a brain dump of these topics. If you want to aim for getting your planning done for the rest of the year, not your recording or anything, but just your planning of your topics and your episode titles. We have 14 weeks. I think I did the math right. We have 14 weeks until the end of the year. So I think it would be awesome if you sat down and just went ahead and got your topics flushed out, and then you can do the recording over time. But once you have some topics, like I showed you in the last slide, so if my topic was show notes, then you're going to go in, do some keyword research. That probably took me not even 5 minutes, right? It doesn't take that much time. Just sit down and just do it. Do some keyword research and then title those episodes before recording. I will in just a second, I'll grab the link for you, but I created a few things. It's just a Google Doc. In case you haven't noticed already, I like my Google Docs. I think they're nice and easy. But I think it's 30 that I came up with of episode title templates. And a lot of them are super easy to just plug a keyword into. So if you're somebody who gets stuck on titles, I'm hoping that this will kind of make that piece of the puzzle a little bit more seamless and easy and quick for you. I know that a lot of you're back at school. This is a crazy time. It's a lot of stuff to keep up with. So use this, try it out, see if it helps you, go through, see what sticks out to you, and just plug and play for your topic. I have like a template and then an example. And then I have a place for you to brainstorm like your top episodes and your topics that you want to cover. And then you can come to the last page and actually put a keyword for each episode and create a title for it before you do any kind of recording or producing. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this training about episode titles and that you got some really good ideas on how you can best title your episodes with engagement and with SEO in mind. If you found this training helpful and you're interested in joining the prep school, where you can learn not only how to launch, manage, and grow your show, but also have that ongoing support, we would love to have you. Because I've added these monthly trainings and we have that ongoing help in the private Facebook group, the price is going to be going up in January 2023. I just want to let you know that in case you are interested in joining, I would go ahead and join now so that you can get access before the price goes up. This is not a membership, so you're not going to have to do ongoing monthly payments. You pay one time, or you can do the payment plan across a few months, and then you're in for life. So you can check it out at podcastingforeducators.com/prep school. And whether or not you join, I'm so happy that you tuned in today, and I will catch you here next week. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. To keep this conversation going, connect with me on Instagram at Podcasting for Educators. I'm always looking for an excuse to talk about podcasting. If you're looking for support in launching, managing, or growing your podcast, check out my online course, the Podcasting for Educators Prep School, at podcastingforeducators.com/prep school. I'll see you here next time.